All right, welcome to another deep dive. This time we're going to be taking a look at NTGapps.
Ooh, very cool.
They say it's like this awesome low-code platform. You can build custom applications. You can think like automating all those boring tasks that you got to do all the time.
Yeah.
Manage data, even like get different systems to talk to each other, which is pretty amazing.
Very cool.
All without like needing to be a coding genius, which is really cool. We're starting with session 1 of their technical documentation.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, there's a lot to cover here.
There is. I think it's super fascinating how like low-code platforms are really changing things up. It's not even just about, saving time and resources. It's really giving like individuals and businesses the tools that they need to really innovate.
Right.
You used to need like a huge team of developers
Yeah.
if you wanted to make like a custom solution, and low-code is really like changing all of that.
Yeah. It's like all of a sudden anyone can build the app of their dreams. So the documentation kicks off. It breaks down NTGapps into its like core pieces.
Okay.
And they use this like clever analogy. They compare it to building a house.
Ah, I love that.
Yeah, I thought it was really smart.
Yeah.
So they say modules are like the rooms. They kind of like hold everything together. And forms are like the doors and windows.
Okay.
It's how you like interact with the data, right?
Yeah.
And then UDAs are like the furniture and decorations.
Oh, cool.
They're the little details that make it, your own.
I like it.
And then you've got like rules and workflows. They're like the plumbing and electrical, right?
Okay.
Keeping everything working behind the scenes.
Yeah.
It's such a good analogy because like it really highlights how important it is to understand how all these pieces like fit together.
Yeah.
Like you wouldn't build a house without knowing how the rooms are connected, right?
Right, exactly. It's foundational.
Yeah, exactly.
You have to understand these fundamentals.
Same for like building a good application in NTGapps.
Totally, yeah.
Totally. So, okay, let's say you are ready to like dive in and create your first application.
Right.
The documentation, they walk you through it step by step.
Bro.
You go to the application designer and you give your app a cool name and you are off to the races. You can start adding modules.
So exciting. One thing that I've learned, over time is even in a low-code environment, like planning is still super important.
Oh, for sure.
Just taking a little bit of time to like map out what your app is supposed to do and how it's going to be structured, like will save you so many headaches later on.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Now, about those modules, NTGapps offers a few different types. Right?
Okay. Yeah.
So you've got like the standard module, which is like perfect for really structured data. And, you can build workflows and stuff. Then you got the free module. This one's more for like dashboards.
Right.
More static content.
Yeah.
And then if you've got, all those lists that you use all the time, the department names or product categories, you can use a dictionary module.
Very handy.
Yeah, super handy. It's interesting how NTGapps really like gets that not all applications are built the same.
Yeah.
They give you the tools to build like a simple data entry form or like a complex, crazy multi-step workflow all in the same platform.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it's very cool. Okay, now forms. Forms are how users like actually interact with our application.
Yeah, right.
And NTGapps has this like drag and drop interface to make building them really easy.
Yeah.
Just grab whatever fields you need, like text boxes, drop downs, all that good stuff.
Yeah.
And arrange them however you want. No coding necessary.
Love it. But it does like bring up an interesting point, right? Like you still need to think about making your forms easy to use.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It's not just about throwing stuff on there.
No.
You got to make sure it's easy to use and makes sense, so people can actually like enter the data correctly.
Yeah, absolutely. The documentation, they even talk about using validation rules to prevent errors and, keep your data nice and clean.
Oh, yeah.
Like making sure someone enters a valid email address.
Right.
Or like if you're entering a date range, making sure the start date is actually before the end date.
Oh, I've seen that one go wrong so many times.
Oh, it's classic. And get this, it gets even more interesting. NTGapps has this like whole role-based access control system.
Okay.
Basically, you get to control who sees what in your application.
All right.
So you can set up different roles like administrators, managers, regular users. Then you give them each like specific permissions. So maybe like managers can edit certain fields, but regular users can only view them.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like really important when you're dealing with sensitive information. You don't want everyone to have access to everything.
Oh, absolutely. So wait.
Yeah.
I can have like a form where certain fields are completely hidden from anyone who's not like supposed to see them.
Yeah, exactly. It's like having a little digital lockbox.
That is amazing. It
Yeah.
seems like they've really thought about security.
They have. It's really crucial, especially these days with all the cyber threats and
Oh,
everything.
yeah, for sure. NTGapps really gives you that control
Hmm.
to like protect your data. Okay, now for the fun part, automation.
Yes. This is what I'm excited about.
We've talked about, how rules can automate tasks, but like the documentation really digs in deep.
Okay, good.
They have some really good examples.
Awesome.
Like one example is like automatically filling in fields based on what the user types in.
Okay.
So like if someone chooses their department from a dropdown,
Yeah.
a rule can automatically go and grab like the departmental head's name and contact info from the database and like boom, fill in those fields.
Oh, that's so smart.
No more like looking things up manually.
Right.
That's just one example. They even talk about using rules for data validation. So like, let's say you have a field for a project budget. You can make a rule to make sure the amount someone puts in doesn't go over a certain limit.
Oh, that's a good idea. So much easier to stop the wrong information from going in.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So how do you like actually create these rules? It sounds kind of complicated.
It's not as bad as you might think. You basically open what they call the rules engine, and you choose what type of rule you want, and then you define the logic and when it should run, and then you activate it. NTGapps makes it pretty easy to understand.
Okay, that makes sense. But how do you like know which type of rule to pick?
Right.
They mentioned like JavaScript rules, SQL rules, and UI triggers. It seems like a lot of choices.
Yeah, it can seem a little overwhelming, but each type is good for different things.
Right.
So if you need to do some really complicated calculations, or you're messing with how the UI looks, JavaScript rules are the way to go. But if you need to change data in the database directly, you'd want to use a SQL rule. And then UI triggers, those are perfect for when you want something to happen when a user does something specific, like clicks a button or picks something from a dropdown.
So it's all about choosing the right tool for the job. It sounds like there's definitely a learning curve, but once you get it, it's pretty powerful
Well,
stuff.
definitely. It's really cool to see how much flexibility and customization they've packed into this platform.
Yeah, for sure. And the documentation does a great job of showing like actual examples of how these rules can be used to like solve real world problems. It's not just theory. They actually show you how to do it.
That's super helpful. Okay, before we move on, let's talk about best practices.
Okay, yeah, good idea. The documentation has some really good tips.
Yeah, best practices are so important. They can really make the difference between an okay application and a fantastic one.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
So first tip, use UDAs wisely. Don't like clutter things up with a bunch of extra fields that you don't really need.
Yeah, that makes it a mess, right?
Yeah, it can really
Oh.
impact like how well the app performs and make it a nightmare to manage.
Right.
Think about what data you actually need and make your UDAs meaningful.
Yeah, that makes sense. Another thing that's super important is making your workflows as efficient as possible.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Keep the approvals streamlined, get rid of any extra steps, and make sure the right people are in the loop at each point.
Yeah, that makes a huge difference.
It really does. It can save so much time and hassle.
Well, it's like if you have a bad workflow, it's like a bottleneck. It
Wow.
slows everything down.
Totally. And of course, we can't forget security. A role-based security is super important. Use those permissions to really control who can access what information,
All right.
protect that sensitive data, make sure only authorized people can make changes.
Yeah, and keep those applications locked down.
Absolutely. And last but not least, testing.
Oh, yes. Testing, testing, testing.
Never skip testing.
Before you launch anything, any rules, any workflows, you got to test them. Make sure they're actually working the way you want them to.
Right.
It's so much easier to fix a bug in a testing environment
Oh, yeah.
than to try to fix it when it's already live.
Totally.
I've learned that the hard way a few times.
Me too, me too. It's funny how so many of these best practices apply to all kinds of software development, not just NTGapps.
Yeah, you're right.
Like keeping your data clean and organized, making your workflows efficient, testing, testing, testing. It's all important no matter what you're building.
Absolutely. It seems like NTGapps is not just teaching us how to use their platform, but teaching us good habits in general.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, it's cool. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here in this first session of the NTGapps documentation.
We have.
From the basic building blocks to the power of automation. It's clear that this platform is a pretty powerful tool.
It is. I'm really impressed with how much they've packed into this low-code environment.
Yeah, same here. What stands out to you the most so far?
Honestly, for me, it's the automation.
Yeah.
The idea that you can like build applications that can do all this repetitive stuff for you, streamline processes, and even like make smart decisions based on data, that's
Oh,
huge.
yeah. And this is just the beginning. There's so much more to explore.
Right. I can't wait to dive deeper into like the advanced workflows and data integration stuff.
Me too. But before we jump into the next session of the technical documentation, let's take a quick pause and gather our thoughts.
Sounds good. Welcome back. I'm still thinking about how much NTGapps manages to do, and still be user friendly.
I know, right?
Yeah.
It's impressive. And the documentation doesn't just like gloss over things either. It really goes into detail.
Yeah.
Clear explanations, step-by-step instructions, practical examples. It's like having a personal tutor, like guiding you through this whole world of NT-GAPS.
It is. It really is. It's actually enjoyable to read this documentation.
Right.
They've done a really good job, like, balancing, giving you all the information you need, but not making it, like, too technical.
Right. It's accessible. Speaking of accessible, let's circle back to something we touched on earlier.
Yeah.
Data security.
Okay.
We talk about role-based access control,
Yeah.
but I feel like the documentation goes even deeper than that.
It does. They really take security seriously.
Yeah.
They've got like this layered approach, and it starts with, defining those user roles and permissions.
Right.
And that's like crucial for any application that's dealing with, sensitive information.
So like you create roles, right?
Yeah.
Administrator or manager,
Mhm.
data entry clerk, all those different roles. And then you say like what each role is allowed to do in the application.
Exactly.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. It's all about controlling, like who can see what and who can change what.
It is, but it's not just about those like big picture permissions like view, edit, delete.
Right.
NT-GAPS lets you get even more specific with something they call field level access control.
Field level access control. Now that sounds interesting. What is that exactly?
Okay, so imagine you've got a form, right? And it's got all this like employee information,
Yeah.
maybe stuff like salary details or performance reviews.
Yeah, sensitive stuff.
Right, sensitive stuff. With field level access control, you can like put restrictions on those specific fields. So only certain people like HR or senior management could actually see them.
Okay.
Everyone else would see them, like grayed out, or maybe the fields would be hidden completely.
Oh, so it's like having a digital lock
Yeah.
on individual pieces of information within the form itself.
Exactly. It's very granular control.
That's pretty impressive.
And it's really important, especially with all the data privacy regulations these days. It's more important than ever to make sure you're protecting sensitive information.
Yeah, for sure. So it seems like NT-GAPS really gives you that flexibility, to customize your security settings and really tailor them to your needs.
Yeah.
It's good to have that level of control. Okay, let's jump back into automation because I'm still really excited about this.
Me too. Always a fun topic.
We've been talking about how rules can automate tasks, but I really liked how the documentation gives you these real-world examples.
Yeah, that's way more helpful than just like talking about it abstractly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like the one example they give is using rules to automatically fill in fields based on what the user enters.
Oh, yeah, we touched on that before.
Yeah. So like if someone picks their department from a drop-down menu, you could set up a rule that automatically pulls in the right manager's name and contact info from the database and boom, fills in those fields on the form.
Yeah. No more hunting around for that information.
Exactly. It's all about making things easier for the user.
Right. Yeah, and saving everyone so much time. Think about how much time that would take if you had to do it manually every single time.
Oh, it would be a nightmare. Okay, and they also talked about using rules for data validation, which we also mentioned before. So like if you have a field for a project budget, you could make a rule to make sure that the amount someone puts in doesn't go over a certain limit or make sure it's formatted correctly.
Yeah. Data validation is so important because it helps you keep your data clean and accurate from the start.
Right. It's like a safety net. It catches those mistakes before they become a big problem.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, here's another cool example they give. Using rules to trigger notifications.
Right.
So like, let's say a new customer request comes in.
Mm.
You could have a rule set up to automatically send an email to the sales team, so they can jump on it right away.
That's a great example of how automation can improve communication and like teamwork because everybody's in the loop.
Yeah, exactly. Everybody's informed and they can respond quickly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's so much more efficient.
Now, one thing the documentation really stresses is like picking the right type of rule for the job. And we talked about those three main types before: JavaScript rules, SQL rules, and UI triggers.
Yeah, it's important to remember that not every rule is, a one-size-fits-all kind of thing.
Right.
They each have their own strengths and weaknesses.
Right.
So if you want to do like really complex calculations or mess with how the user interface looks, you'd probably use a JavaScript rule. But if you need to change the data directly in the database, then a SQL rule would be the way to go. And then UI triggers, those are perfect for when you want something to happen, when a user does a specific action, like clicking a button or picking something from a list.
So it's all about using the right tool for the job, basically. It seems like there is a learning curve there.
There is, but the documentation is really helpful.
Yeah.
And once you get the hang of it, you can do some really amazing things.
Oh, for sure. And I really like how the documentation doesn't just like throw you into the deep end. It's well structured, it's easy to follow, and it's full of examples.
It's a really valuable resource.
Yeah. And of course, we cannot forget about testing.
Oh, never.
The documentation is like really big on this. Like, make sure you test your rules, test your workflows before you actually launch them.
Yeah, testing is not optional. It's essential.
It's the only way to be sure that everything's working correctly and that you haven't, accidentally created any problems.
Right. It's like you're doing a dress rehearsal before the actual performance.
Exactly. It's so much easier to fix something when you're still in, like, the testing phase.
Yeah.
Speaking of learning from experience, I think it would be good to talk about best practices. The documentation has some really good advice on how to get the most out of NTGapps and how to avoid some common mistakes.
Yeah, those best practices are like little golden nuggets of wisdom. They can save you a lot of time and frustration down the road.
Absolutely. So what are some of the key takeaways from the documentation in terms of best practices?
Okay, so the first one is be smart about your UBAs. Don't just create fields for the sake of creating fields,
Right.
Really think about what information you need to capture and make your UDAs meaningful and efficient. Because if you just have a ton of unnecessary fields, it can make your application slow and hard to manage.
It's all about finding that balance, right?
Yeah.
Between capturing all the data you need and keeping things clean and organized.
Totally. Another key best practice: optimize your workflows. Make sure those approval processes are streamlined, get rid of any extra steps that aren't really needed, and make sure the right people are involved at each stage.
Yeah, it makes such a difference.
It really does. A well-designed workflow can, dramatically improve efficiency and productivity.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Like, I can imagine if you have a bad workflow, it just creates bottlenecks and delays and frustration,
Yeah.
especially if you're in a big organization.
Totally. Okay, and of course, we can't forget about security. Role-based security is a must. Use those granular permissions to really control who has access to what information. Protect that sensitive data, make sure only the right people can make changes, and keep everything nice and secure.
Yeah, it's great that NTGapps gives you all those tools and features to really implement strong security measures.
Right. They've really thought this through. And last but not least, testing. I know we keep saying it, but it's just that important. Always test your rules and your workflows before you launch them.
Mm-hmm.
Thorough testing can save you from a lot of headaches and prevent those costly mistakes.
Yeah. It's funny how a lot of these best practices, they're not just specific to NTGapps. They really apply to any kind of software development project.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Clean data modeling, optimizing workflows, testing. It's all important.
Totally. All right, I'm excited to see what the next session of the technical documentation has in store for us. They mentioned advanced workflow automation and data integration, and I'm really curious to see how they approach those topics.
Me too.
Yeah.
We've already covered so much ground in this first session, and I feel like we've only just scratched the surface.
We have. It makes you wonder, what kind of tasks in your own work or life could you automate with NTGapps?
Ooh, that's a great question. There are so many possibilities.
The possibilities are endless.
Okay, but before we dive into that next session, let's take a quick break to let all this information sink in.
Sounds good to me.
All right, welcome back to our deep dive into NTGapps. We've really gone through a lot, haven't we?
We have.
We've looked at all the basic pieces, like how the platform works, all those core components, and we dug into automation, which is super cool. We even talked about, best practices, how to really get the most out of NTGapps. But there's more.
There is.
Session 1 kind of hinted at even more advanced stuff, and I'm really curious to see what else we can do with this platform.
Yeah, me too. It's like we've explored the tip of the iceberg, and now it's time to dive deeper, see what else is down there. What specifically are you most curious about?
Well, they mentioned advanced workflow automation and data integration, and like those phrases alone are like really exciting. I mean, think about it, like seamlessly connecting all your different systems
Right.
and automating these like really complex business processes. It's like it's next level efficiency.
Yeah, and that's really what it's all about these days, right? It's not just like automating little tasks here and there. It's about like orchestrating these whole workflows across multiple systems. And that's where a platform like NTGapps can really, really shine.
Okay, so let's try to like put it all together. We know NTGapps has this powerful rules engine, right? It can handle all sorts of calculations, data manipulation, conditional logic, and it's got that role-based access control and all those granular permissions.
Mm-hmm.
So you know the right people are seeing the right data.
Mm.
So how does all of that like fit into this bigger picture of, advanced workflow automation and data integration?
Okay, so picture this, right? You've got a sales process with multiple steps, like lead capture, quote generation, order fulfillment, all that.
Yeah.
And each of those steps probably involves like different systems, different teams, different data points. What NTGapps can do is like be the central hub, the brain that orchestrates the whole thing.
Okay.
So it can like seamlessly move data between those systems, trigger actions based on, predefined rules, and make sure everyone has the information they need at every stage.
Okay, so it's like NT-GAPS is the conductor of an orchestra, making sure all the different instruments are playing together.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great way to put it.
But can you give me like a real-world example of how NT-GAPS would actually handle like data integration?
Sure, sure. Let's say a customer places an order on your website, your e-commerce site.
Yeah.
NTGapps could grab that order data, create a new customer record in your CRM system, generate an invoice in your accounting software, and even like ping your fulfillment team to start packing up the order.
Wow.
And all of that happens automatically.
That's wild. It's like having a little digital assistant handling all the boring, repetitive tasks so you can focus on like the important stuff.
Exactly. And you don't need to be like a coding expert to set this up. NTGapps has this like visual interface where you can drag and drop stuff, connect systems, define rules, all using like really intuitive logic. It's low code at its best.
So businesses can use NT-GAPS to like really streamline their operations, reduce errors, improve efficiency, and they don't need to hire a whole team of developers to do it. It almost sounds too good to be true.
It's pretty amazing. It's all about giving people the power to innovate and solve problems, even if they don't have a tech background.
Yeah, it's empowering.
Yeah.
And it brings us back to, one of the key takeaways here, the power of low-code platforms.
Definitely.
NT-GAPS is like a perfect example of how this kind of technology is really changing the game. It's giving people who aren't like programmers the ability to create really sophisticated solutions, and it's opening up a whole new world of possibilities.
It is. And as these low-code platforms keep getting better and more powerful, I think we're going to see even more incredible things happening. It's blurring the lines between, business users and developers, and it's driving this whole new wave of like digital transformation.
This deep dive has been really cool. We've learned so much about NT-GAPS, from the nuts and bolts of how it works to the like bigger picture of what low code can do.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but I'm ready to build something now.
Me too. It makes you think, what could you automate in your own work or even like your personal life with a tool like NTGapps?
Yeah.
The possibilities are really endless.
That's a great question for our listeners to think about. And for anyone who wants to keep learning, I definitely recommend checking out the next session of the technical documentation. They hinted at even more advanced stuff, so it should be really interesting.
It should be. And whether you're, a seasoned developer or just starting out, remember, you don't need to be a tech expert to use these tools. Platforms like NTGapps are making it possible for anyone to do amazing things.
That's so true. Well, that wraps up our NT-GAPS deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Until next time, keep learning, keep exploring, and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible.